Great. So welcome everyone. I just realized we're recording now. So for those who joined the recording, welcome everyone to the JRAI session on how to publish at the JRAI. My name is Chika Watanabe, one of the co-editors at the JRAI, and Hannah Knox is here as well as one of the other co-editors. So let me just jump right in and get started. I will share my screen. I assume you can see, Anna Maria, you can be my person to tell me if it's not showing.
It's all good, Chika.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right, so the other two editors are Adam Reed and Tom Yarrow, as you might know, and the four of us are the co-editors of the JRAI. We should mention that we are in our last year as editors. So starting October of 2024, there will be new editors coming in. Right. So today we are excited to have 7 published authors from the JRAI who are here with us. Aaron Kepler from the University of Edinburgh, Elisa Tamburo from Harvard University, Garima Jaju from the University of Cambridge, Joe Alter from the University of Pittsburgh, Sarah Friedman, who'll join us a little bit later, from Indiana University, Simon Coleman from the University of Toronto, and Uroš Kovač from the University of Groningen. And you'll have a chance to talk to them more closely during the breakout session. So just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So Hannah and I will talk probably about 20 minutes going over what kinds of articles we expect to see at the JRAI and nitty-gritty details about the submission revision process. Then we'll go around with the JRAI, the published authors, and they'll give you a couple of minutes of comments, tips about publishing at the JRAI. Then we'll have breakout rooms, 30 minutes with the authors. So each breakout room will have one of the published authors where they can give you more concrete details about their experience publishing at the JRAI, and you can ask them more questions in a semi-intimate environment. There are 100 of you, I think, so it might not be as intimate as as that, but hopefully it'll make it easier for you to ask questions in that setting. Then we'll come back, and in the last 10 minutes, we can answer any other general questions that you might have. And during the breakout rooms, Hannah and I will be circulating, so you'll find us, there as well if you have any questions for us as well. All right, so one thing to keep in mind is the JRAI has a very wide audience, a wide readership. We also, we publish social anthropology articles, but we also publish linguistic anthropology, biological anthropology, archaeology, cognitive anthropology, and so on. Obviously, if you're a social anthropologist, which is the majority of submissions, you don't have to speak to all those fields, but your argument, your intervention does have to speak to, what we often say in our letters is, it has to speak to wider anthropological debates or discussions. So that's something to keep in mind if you are thinking of the JRAI as a potential outlet. If you have more of a regional intervention, you're engaging more with regional literature, then you might consider that kind of journal. Or if you are interested more in intervening in a thematic, concern, let's say, legal anthropology, then, you might consider other outlets. And this is to say that sometimes we get submissions that are, great quality, really interesting, but it's, seems to be contributing to, let's say a regional debate or a thematic debate. In which case it doesn't mean that the manuscript is not of, good quality or anything. It just means that, it might not be a fit with the JRAI. What makes a good article for the JRAI? As I mentioned, it has to engage with wide anthropological debates and discussions. One way to, I guess, check that is to share your manuscript with people who don't work in your region or with people who don't work on your topic, and see if it's a kind of argument that they could, take from. Obviously has to answer the so what question, which I think is relevant for all kinds of articles for any journal, I suppose. But again, the so what has to be relevant for a wide anthropological readership. The argument should, or the essay should articulate the originality of the argument, and that will be by showing your theoretical contribution against your ethnographic insights and ethnographic research. So we do accept pieces that are purely theoretical as well, but they always should be ethnographically informed, right? The theoretical analysis or argument should still show that it's coming from your ethnographic work. And in terms of articulating the originality or novelty of the argument, part of that is about engaging with the relevant literature in a way, in a form of engagement that's generous, and doesn't pit other authors as strawman sorts of arguments. And one thing that might be useful is to perhaps browse through past JRAI articles and see what kinds of pieces we have published in the past. And you might want to engage with some of that in your submissions as well. So some general tips. One is to, don't try to engage with too many debates or theories. We say that it's better to choose a single debate, engage well and closely through your ethnography. Obviously, it still has to speak to a wider concern in anthropology, but don't try to use too many different concepts in your argumentation. Another, again, this probably applies to any journal, but don't just tell us that there's a gap that you're trying to fill. You need to show what your positive contribution is to that discussion. Because we want our articles to be ethnographically grounded, if it's an ethnographic submission, then you should also let your ethnography theorize as well. We also say, avoid making sweeping assertions or generalizations. Be specific about the argument that you can make from your evidence. But obviously also, don't be afraid to make bold claims. So this is the JRAI website. It's a little bit confusing because we have our standalone website, which is the link above. And there's also the Wiley website, which is where you would access the articles. But I'm gonna hand it over to Hannah, who can speak a little bit about the nitty-gritty details of the submission process.
Yeah, so having kind of talked about the broad kind of questions of what we're looking for, I thought it would be helpful just to kind of explain what happens when you submit an article to the JRAI so that you have a sense of what to expect. And I think hopefully this can help you prepare. So should we go to the next slide? Okay, so first of all, we use a submission portal. We use one called Editorial Manager, which is where you'll go to submit your paper. All the papers that we publish have a word limit of 10,000 words, including title and abstract. So when you submit your paper, you'll have an opportunity to nominate reviewers for your article. And we take that into account when we go through the process of sending your paper out to review. Now, I think from experience, it's good to nominate maybe 2 or 3 people. If you nominate a really long list, that can kind of be, it can almost count against you because we tend to only send the article to one of your nominated reviewers. in order to make sure, to be fair and to give your articles to people who we feel are kind of going to review them neutrally. So if we've got a really long list of reviewers covering most of your field, then that makes our life a little bit more difficult. So maybe just a few suggestions. And think about, who you think would be generous readers who will engage with your argument, seriously and supportively. Doesn't have to be people that it could be people that, and if there are people who have seen your work before, you can also flag up that those are probably people we don't want to send the paper to. Often we'll get reviewers saying, oh, I've already seen a version of this paper. I don't feel that I can review it because I'm too close to it. Okay. So one of the things that we always emphasize is how important the abstract is. Sometimes an abstract can feel like a bit of an afterthought when you're writing a paper, but the abstract is really key when we first receive articles, because it's the abstract that we first look at, and we send the abstract out to our editorial board for all the papers that we receive. And also we send the abstract out to reviewers. So if you've got a good abstract, it means that you're going to get good choices of reviewers to review your article suggested by the editorial board. They'll have a good sense of like what the issue is that you're trying to grapple with and what the contribution is that you're trying to make. And also, if you're very clear in your abstract about what the article's about, then we're more likely to have reviewers agreeing to review the article. If they don't really understand what the article's about from the abstract, it's easy to say, oh no, I haven't got time to review that. And it's always a challenge, I think, for all journal editors to find people to review papers. So occasionally we have papers where we find reviewers very quickly, but the norm is that we have to ask quite a lot of people before we find the 3 reviewers for the articles that we work on. So that's fine. I think we've covered that. Yeah. So when the article comes in, there's 4 of us who are working as an editorial team, and we divide the papers up equally between us. And so you'll be assigned an editor out of the 4 of us, and we'll read the abstract, and we'll also read the paper. And we'll make an initial decision about whether we think it's a good fit for the journal, and about whether to send it to review. The good thing about us being an editorial team is if we have any kind of if that's ambiguous or we're not sure, we can consult with each other, and we also consult with the editorial board. And we've got about 40 people on our editorial board with a really wide range of regional and topical interests. So the idea is that we kind of get some input early on. So we then make a decision about whether we feel this is a paper that should go out to review. And what we're trying to think about at that stage is really realistically whether we think the paper is likely to have a positive kind of journey through the review process. So the first thing we're thinking about is whether it's a good fit for the journal and whether it's at a standard that we feel is appropriate for publishing in the JRAI. And so we have sort of 3 versions of responses to authors when we don't really feel that it's a journal that will go through to the review process. So the first is that we'll write back with a reject decision, which will just say this is, we really don't think this is the right journal for your paper, or we don't think that the ideas are sufficiently developed and you need to work on it a bit more. And the first is a reject, which is just to say we don't think this is a paper for us. And it might be that it goes to another journal. Sometimes we get papers where we do think there's potential there for it to be a publication that could be published in JRAI, but we don't feel confident that it's quite ready. So we write back to authors with a reject, but we make it clear that if authors want to work on the material a bit more, develop their argument, read a bit more of the literature, we'll give them some sort of initial comments and invite them to submit another version down the line with a new title. So it'd be ostensibly a new submission, but that we'd look at it in the same way, completely neutrally, and treat it as a new submission. And then occasionally we have submissions where the abstract is really unclear. And so we do sometimes write back to authors and we ask for a resubmission with a new abstract, which is linking with the previous points I was making earlier. So this is a little bit like what Chika was talking about earlier. The key things that we're looking for: a good abstract, a clear contribution to existing debates or issues in anthropology. And it doesn't mean that you have to like say everything that you're saying is new, but that you show that you're in, that what you're saying is advancing existing conversations in anthropology. So that might be debates in the anthropology of religion or economic anthropology or the study of kinship. And you might have quite a kind of specific contribution that you want to make, but that you do the work of showing why that could be interesting to anthropologists who may be working in that broad field, but are not working on the kind of specific topic that you're looking at. We're very keen to publish ethnographically grounded papers. I think that's hopefully come through already. And when we do publish theoretical papers, even if they're not based on your own ethnography, I think we're still looking for some sense of ethnographic evidence to be informing that paper. So it may be that people are using secondary material rather than their own material, but we tend not to publish very abstract theoretical pieces. Yeah, okay, and go to the next slide. So yeah, so then we'll identify the reviewers with the suggestions that we get from the editorial board. We also will, having read the article, we'll have a sense of the debates. We'll also do some research ourselves to find appropriate reviewers. Sometimes when people can't review, they'll also suggest additional people who we can contact. And we'll send the abstract to the reviewers, and then if they accept, then we send them the full paper. Now, the first stage, when we first get the article in, we try to turn everything around within 3 weeks. So within 3 weeks of initially submitting your article, the decision should have been made about whether it's going to get sent out to review or not. And then reviewers are given, once reviewers accept, they're given about 4 to 6 weeks to submit their review. Now, sometimes it can take quite a long time to find reviewers to accept, and sometimes people, because of their teaching commitments, will accept, but they'll say they need a bit longer. So this can sometimes sort of extend the review process a bit longer than we would really like. But that's our ambition, is to try to get reviews back within 4 to 6 weeks. We'd look for 3 reviews, ideally. Sometimes if we found that we're really struggling to find a third reviewer, or somebody's agreed to review and they're not sending back their review and the clock's ticking, we appreciate people do want to get their work published. So there are occasions when we will go with just 2 reviews, particularly if the comments from both reviewers are quite complementary and consistent with one another. And the review process at the JRAI is a double-blind review, which is something that we actually brought in during our editorship, because we had a single blind review process previously. So we get the reviews back, and then the process is that as editors, we'll read the reviews of the paper, we'll consider their recommendations. So each of the reviewers will say whether or not the article should be accepted with minor revisions, given major revisions in a revise and resubmit, or whether it should be rejected. And then we'll evaluate those reviews, and we'll then make an editorial decision on the basis of those reviews. And sometimes there's a lot of consensus among the reviewers, and sometimes I've definitely had papers where there's been 4 reviews and there's been one that says accept, one that says minor, one that says major revisions, and one that says reject. And then your work's really cut out as an editor to navigate that and work out how to proceed. So then as editors, we try to draw out the things that we think are most important from those reviews and craft a sort of set of guidelines for the author, so that you can kind of work out where to put most of your attention. And this should help you in making some choices when it comes to redrafting. So there may be things that we feel reviewers have raised, but there's actually some discretion as to whether that's something that the author would want to do to change their paper, or maybe they might decide that's not the direction they want to take it in and they want to take it in another direction. So we try to help mediate that process. So the most common response at this stage is revise and resubmit. It's pretty uncommon that papers will just get minor revisions at this stage. Minor revisions tend to be sort of really quite sort of maybe adding a few missing references or clarification of some terms and some very specific points in a paper. A revise and resubmit covers quite a wide range of revisions, from some quite kind of substantial structural reworking of the paper to some more signposting of what the paper's about and what the main argument is. So if you get a revise and resubmit, that's pretty like that, that's a very common response. Then it's really important that you work really closely with the reviewers' comments. We have generally very generous reviewers who put a lot of time into the work that they do for the journal and take the reviewing work very seriously. And I think, you may disagree with what reviewers say, and that's completely fine. You can disagree, and in your response you can explain if there's things where you do disagree with what reviewers have said. But hopefully criticism that might be being made of the paper that you've written can be read as constructive and helpful. And I think hopefully when we hear from our authors here, some of them will be able to tell you about how they responded to the reviewers' comments and how that helped them develop their papers. So you don't have to address every single point that a reviewer has made. You might have reviewers who are making contradictory suggestions. So you really need to decide which of the points you feel are reasonable and which are going to strengthen your paper, and look at the editor's letter to help you with that. And just remember, it's your paper. So, we're trying to work with you to ensure that the publication that comes out is the best representation of the research that you've done, and most clearly articulates the contribution that you want to make. But we're not trying to, it's not just a tick box exercise of making sure every single thing that all the reviewers have said have been covered and you're sort of saying everything. That's definitely not what we're looking for. So yeah, so when you have made your revisions, then it's important that you provide a covering letter that explains what revisions you've made and communicates back with the editors how you've responded to the editorial suggestions and also how you've responded to the reviewers' specific comments. There are opportunities, so we don't have a deadline within which authors have to respond to reviewers' comments. So it may be that if you're submitting a paper now and then you get assigned an editor and you get reviewers' comments back, that you may then get the paper back, and because of your own timetable, it might be a while before you can submit your revised version. And in that circumstance, it might be that you end up working with the new editors of the journal who'll be taking over in September. And yeah, I think I can't remember what the point was about the myth of reviewer two, except to say that generally we don't tend to have very critical reviewers. I mean, people can be critical, but we don't tend to have very unreasonable reviewers, which is a bit of a myth, I think, that circulates. And as editors, we also try to manage that. So if we do have a review that we feel is a bit out of kilter with other reviews, or particularly is kind of targeting someone in a way that feels unreasonable, we'll try and mediate that through the editorial response. Okay, So then you've done your revisions and you resubmit the journal through the journal, your paper through the journal portal, again, explaining what changes you've made. And I think one key point to make here is that the reviewers have access to the letter that we write to you after you've submitted, after your revisions have come through, and they'll also see the letter that you then write back to us explaining the changes that you've made. So when you're writing that response letter, it's good to bear that in mind, both in terms of maybe thanking the reviewers for the work that they've done, but also in terms of sort of being polite about the changes that you might have made to your article on the basis of the reviewers' comments. And then then we'll send it. So then we'll receive your response, and depending on the amount of changes that have been necessary at that stage, it may be the case that we send it out for review again. And sometimes we'll send it back to the same reviewers that looked at the article in the first place, and that's our preferred kind of model. But it may be that those reviewers are not available anymore, or there might be specific reasons why that doesn't feel like the right thing to do. And so we may send your article to new reviewers at that stage, although that's less common. And then the process is basically the same process again, until we get to the stage where we feel that the author has addressed the major comments that have been made about what needs to be done to the article, and we can start to proceed to publication. So at this stage, we then would accept the article or accept with minor revisions, which can usually be turned around relatively quickly. And then we'll send the article to it'll go through to our copy editing team. So we have this fantastic copy editor called Justin, who anyone who's published in the JRAI will have had the pleasure of working with him. And he just has he does a lot more than just noticing where there might be some missing commas, and really sort of make sure that the quality of the text is really clear, really high, and that the way that you're writing is coming through really professionally and clearly. Yeah. And then sometimes the copy editing turnaround times can be quite quick, which can seem a bit strange given the amount of time that the review process has sometimes taken. And that's because by that stage, we are then working within the timetable of the publisher, Wiley. And so they have a series of kind of processes that mean that the copy editing has to be turned around quite quickly. So don't be surprised if you receive a request to look at the copy edits on your paper and respond to them within a few days. The copy editors and proofreaders themselves are under pretty tight deadlines. So that's where that comes from. Okay, and then at that point, your article will be published. So there's a couple of things here. First of all, we tend to have two stages of publication. So the first is that articles now can be published online as soon as they're ready. So although they will still be allocated to a particular issue of the journal, and we have a rolling kind of plan for the upcoming issues of the journal with what papers are going to be published in what issue. If everything is ready before the date of publication, then it will be available online at that point in time, which is really nice because it means you can then get a readership straight away. And then it will also be published kind of officially in print in the actual journal issue, and that might be a few months further down the line. We are moving increasingly towards an open access model of publishing, using the institutional structures of open access. So generally this means your funder or your institution that you work for will have an arrangement with publishers about publishing work from scholars who are either funded by that funding agency or employed by that institution. And that will enable your work to be published open access. If you don't have that, then it will be accessible through the usual kind of routes of a library or institutional affiliation. So And I'm aware that I've gone a little bit over time. So I feel like maybe we've kind of covered most of the points about like the process of publishing in the journal. And these were some more general tips. But I think the point is to see the process always, and like whatever career stage you're at, to see the process of submitting to a journal and getting the reviews back and working on your paper as a process of learning, and not to get too fixated on success or failure of publishing in this particular journal. We hope that you submit your paper and it goes through the review process and you publish with us. But many papers go through the review process in our journal and end up still being published in another place, and still get out there in the world. So yes, good luck.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, I'm conscious of time. So why don't I stop sharing for now? And maybe we can go around and hear a little bit from the published authors. And then if it looks like we have time, we can do like 1 or 2 questions. But okay, I'm gonna go around in the order of the names that appear on my page. So Joe, do you wanna tell us who you are? Any tips,
Sure.
comments?
Great. Good to be here. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name's Joe Walter. I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of Pittsburgh, medical anthropology, published very recently in JRAI. Had a wonderful experience. Very glad to be here today. The reason for choosing the journal was precisely its legacy as a wonderful journal, as well as the broad perspective of the editorial collective and the very deep expertise in the editorial board. So I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Wonderful. Aaron?
So as Chika says, my name is Aaron Kapler. I'm a lecturer in social anthropology and development studies at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm also the director of admissions for international development. One tip I would offer for publishing JRAI is, if you're anything like me, you need to understand that the review process is inevitably going to involve some cutting and trimming. And it's important to know which threads are integral to your argument and which can be let go without the whole thing unraveling. That's always an issue I have whenever I publish. That process is going to be a lot less traumatic if you know ahead of time what you can lose and what you have to keep. And it's also important to know what kind of writer you are and where your strengths lie, because the truth is your feedback is probably going to come in the area of your greatest weakness. Some people are really good at theory, but they struggle with working in all the ethnographic details to substantiate the argument. And then there's some people, on the other hand, who are really good at ethnographic narrative, and they quickly produce a compelling analysis of the social relations and the meanings in their field site. But then they sometimes tend to stall once they get to a bigger picture argument or something that relates to the literature. So you need to anticipate that the reviewers are going to identify that. And so it's a lot better if you expect that, if you know that that's coming. And just to echo some of the things that Hannah said, you're going to have to engage productively and charitably with the feedback that you receive from the reviewers. And I'll just tell you, as someone who's been an academic for quite some time now, I mean, relatively young academic, but been publishing for quite some time, people are going to misread your work. It's going to happen, especially if you've never published in an academic journal before. And I don't think that's in any way particular to JRAI. It's really important for you to understand that that's an inevitability, and it's not a question of bad faith on the part of the reviewers. So maybe that's the thing about the myth of reviewer number 2. You need to remember that these are people who've honestly been able to get that particular meaning or interpretation out of your work. And you need to ask yourself, was there some turn of phrase or ellipsis in the analysis that made that interpretation possible? So what you really need to think about is your own articulation. And could you have phrased something better or been more explicit about something to help them? And, coming back to the point about the threads, you may have to remove some threads from your paper in order to do that embellishment or in order to do that elaboration. So that's a big tip that I would give. Be ready to elaborate on some points and to remove some threads from the paper.
Great. Thank you so much. Elisa?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Elisa Tamburo. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Marie Curie and now JRAI as well, postdoctoral fellow thanks to Brexit at the University of Harvard, anthropology, and the School of Geography and the Environment in the University of Oxford. I think my tips for publishing, well, first of all, in general, not just for the JRAI, would be look carefully at your material and see what you've got. Do you have more ethnographic material? Do you have more secondary sources? Do you want to theorize? Do you want to make a philosophical discussion of what you have? And see then if it fits. Of course, the JRAI is a giant of publications in anthropology, and everyone would like to publish with that. But also, I would emphasize that if the material is not for it, maybe you can just put it somewhere else, and then when the time is ripe, you can go for it. I would say that in my case, I had material that excited me a lot. It was quite ethnographic. And the tip that the editors have already given, I would re-emphasize it. You could theorize from the ethnographic detail, and you should theorize from the ethnography rather than, so in a sense, bottom up rather than top down. And another thing I would say is spend time with your article. Maybe don't rush it. I know that we are all under pressure with, tenure track, publications, and so on. But I have drafted several versions of the article that got published, and I got inputs from colleagues who are very generous. I would say give it to read to people that you trust, and people that can give generous comments, and people who are honest. And I would say submit when you're ready. Don't rush it. Another tip maybe is about the comments. I think work with the comments that you get. I was maybe very lucky, but maybe not, because I'm sure the editors are choosing very constructive reviewers. I got very constructive reviews, and I think that the reviewers really put their time, and they were very generous with their comments. And when I say generous, it means that their questions made me think further about my arguments, about where the argument could go. The first version I submitted had, of course, an argument, but I think that what I received, the feedback I received, made me see how the argument could go in different more directions, and it highlighted my contribution to the field. So when a reviewer has a question, maybe it's not to be taken as a criticism, but it can actually enhance considerably your work and your contribution. And even if, I don't know, maybe you're unlucky and you receive criticism, I think the editors are mediating. And even when you receive the comments from the reviewers, you have maybe 3-4 pages of comments, and they are very helpful in summarizing what they want to see, what your work should do with these comments. So I think that their summary of the reviewers was very, very helpful in guiding me to revise the article. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you. Garima?
Yes, hi, I'm Garima Jaju. I'm a research fellow at the University of Cambridge, and I just recently published with JRAI. I think I want to begin by saying that the process was surprisingly wonderful. It was just so enjoyable, and I didn't think, and as an early career, it was quite intimidating when I first submitted. But there was such a generosity of spirit, and it was not wonderful because they said wonderful things about my work, but there was an honesty in how the reviewers read. And it wasn't just criticism of what didn't work. They always point, there was very productive feedback on where I could take it and how I could respond to their criticism. And also the editors, in their reading of the reviews and then in their letter to back to us, they give a really clear steer on how it becomes a frame for all the reviews that you receive. So it wasn't overwhelming, and it was almost exciting because I felt like the reviews were pushing me to make, to walk me to the argument I wanted to make. When I was preparing the article, the exercise was very much in distilling the argument. So picking a very specific debate and making clear my contribution there. But the review process helped me expand the argument again, so sort of draw in other scholarship that I think I was finding too distracting when I was preparing the manuscript. But I was quite happy that the review process let the manuscript breathe again and draw in more literature that I had initially removed, or even ethnographic detail that I had initially removed. And maybe just a final tip. I thought the writing of the cover letter in my response to the reviewers and also to the editors was a very helpful analytical exercise, because I got to clarify for myself what was really at the heart of the reviews and also what it is that I had done to address it. So just preparing a roadmap for how the reviewers and the editors look at my revised manuscript. I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you so much. Sarah?
Hello, I'm Sarah Friedman. I'm a professor of anthropology and gender studies at Indiana University. I think everyone has given really helpful comments. I'll just mention a few things that come to mind based on my experiences publishing with this journal and others as well, and also serving as a reviewer for many journals, because I think that's helpful to hear a little bit about what the other side looks like. One comment is to be very intentional about selecting your audience. Is JRAI speaking to the audience you want to reach through your work? Is your article currently framed in a way that will be appreciated by the audience that is reading this journal? In my case, I was pretty intentional about wanting to reach an audience outside of North America with this work. And that was one of my motivations, as well as publishing in a top anthropology journal. So those are some things you might want to think about. Looking at your citations, the work that you're drawing on, where are those people publishing as well? A second comment is echoing points that I think several other authors have mentioned, which is to be patient, especially to be patient with the process of the review. It takes time. In my case, it took a full year from my first submission to when the article was finally accepted. It went through 2 rounds of review and my revisions and resubmitting. But if you stick with it, I think you've heard from many of the authors here that you really do benefit from that feedback, and your article is improved as a consequence. A final point is about your mindset or space when you do get reviews and you are reading them. My recommendation is don't read them on the fly. Don't read them on your phone. Don't read them when you're commuting someplace. Give yourself a quiet, calm space to read and to digest. And I think Elisa and Garima both have mentioned the summary letter from the editors is extremely helpful in picking out the main points from the reviewers, to read across them, especially if they have different kinds of suggestions. So putting yourself in a space where you can hear that constructively and where you can digest it in a way that isn't sparking feelings of resistance or anger, but is really treating the reviews as an initial step in a conversation. You know your material better than anybody else, but we don't always at first blush convey our knowledge as effectively as we could. So the reviewers are really asking you to do a better job of making your argument, of bringing to the fore the material you need to bring to the fore to support that argument. So thinking of it as a conversation as opposed to criticism, I think, can be a useful way to approach them. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Urosh?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening. My name is Uroš Kovac. I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands at the Faculty of Religion, Culture, and Society. For JRAI, I wrote an article about my fieldwork from Kenya, specifically about long-distance runners in Kenya and about ideologies of competition. Maybe a few tips, like a few general tips that I can give. One thing from this specific experience for me, for JRAI, again, like everybody said, it was a wonderful experience, and the editors were very, they were very good at guiding me in the revising, and the reviewers were also very generous. I would say with the initial submission, I think it is important to maybe wait a little bit longer and submit something that is kind of very well cooked, that is very developed already. Sometimes I would also, to some other journals, submit something that I think is maybe not completely developed, and I would wait for peer review to see where I can take the article. I think maybe for journals that I think receive a lot of submissions that are very selective, maybe that's not the best thing to do. Maybe it's better to do this yourself, and also to share your work with other colleagues for them to read and to give you comments before submitting to the journal, because this will make the peer review process go much more smoothly. At least that was my experience. The second tip would be, I think, when it comes to responding to reviewers, I do find it important to respond to every single thing that the reviewers are flagging. That doesn't mean that I will make all the changes, and it's usually not possible because reviewers will suggest sometimes very contradictory things. But in those cases, I would follow the lead of the editors, who are very important in guiding this process of revision. But it is, I think, important to, in the response letter, to list every single, even the smallest detail that the reviewers are asking for, and saying, well, I revised it in this way, or I didn't revise it because A, B, and C. The last thing I think I would say just briefly, if English is not your first language, I would encourage you to submit or to try to publish in JRAI. This was the case for me. So English is my second language. It will probably mean, at least it means for me, that it takes more time to polish the language. And I do think it's important that the language is that the English and kind of the writing itself is very polished and very good, so to speak, or on a high level. But articles from authors whose language, who don't have English as a first language, they do get published in JRAI. And so, I would encourage you to try. So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Simon.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see so many people here. I'm an anthropologist based in the Department for the Study of Religion at the University of Toronto, and a former editor of JRAI about, 15 years ago. So it's great to see, I guess, the kind of collective editing, I think, is a kind of really wonderful way to take the journal. I guess an initial comment, and then just for a few very, very quick tips. Initial comment is that I think it's useful to think of the work that the editors put into the journal, as well as the reviewers, as a kind of gift to you. It's not paid work, but it's fantastic to have this group of people whom you probably don't necessarily know, and they're actually commenting on your work. And I published articles at various points in my career in JRAI, and the most recent one, what two of the reviewers did for me in their reviews was actually play my article back to me. They said to me, "This is what I see in your article," and that was unbelievably helpful in making me think through what the threads were, I guess, that we've heard about. Just three very quick tips. One is to go back to the abstract. The abstract is key, I think, to the process, of course, of getting through into the review process. But it's often the thing which I think, I don't know if you're like me, you write the abstract when you're exhausted with the article, and you think, oh God, what am I going to write? But actually, the abstract has to be seen as a kind of genre in itself, a genre of writing in itself. So I recommend to people, don't just lift disparate sentences from your paper and shove them in the abstract. Write it separately. And in that process of writing it separately, you're also forcing yourself to say, do I actually have a central argument here? Do I actually have a sense of my audience? So that process of writing the abstract can tell you something about where you are with the article. And the thought experiment I always play journal like JRAI is to say, okay, I'm writing about England or Sweden or wherever. If I have to imagine the reader who has no interest in Sweden or England ethnographically, who isn't, say, an anthropologist of religion like me, how can I get them to read this article? What is it about this article that they actually might find helpful? Second thing I was going to say is that I think what most of you will do, like me, I guess, is you write a piece that says nearly 10,000 words. You then get some fantastic comments from your reviewers, and you think, okay, I now want to increase this to 15,000 words. That's not going to happen. And this goes back, I think, to kind of Aaron's points about threads and really prioritizing. You've got to have a strong sense of what the central argument is for your paper, because then you can actually work out how to streamline the argument within the 10,000 words. And I think that's actually quite helpful to really give you a sense of where you're going with the piece. I think just a couple more very quickly. I think the reviews, but what do you do when you get the reviews? Do you just kind of avoid reading them or what? I certainly sit down and consider them. I always say actually read them first and then actually go away again and maybe a day later come back to them. And I think it's actually quite helpful. You've allowed them to mull over in your mind, and then you can come back to them and kind of reconsider them. My final point is actually it's very important for a journal like JRAI to kind of read the style guide, to think through the language, to be as professional as possible when you're in mind that have some confidence. You can read the articles and you think these are so fantastic. How am I ever going to write something of this standard? But bear in mind, what you're reading is the end product. The product of the article has gone through the review process, that's had editors comment on it, and it's JRI doing its job. So have confidence in submitting, and with luck, your work will appear at some point. Okay, I'll finish there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All of those tips were super helpful. There's one, I see a lot of questions were already happening in the chat and they were all being answered. There's one question at the end about what should an abstract contain? What should it be about? I think it might be that's where it might be helpful to go back to the articles that have been published at the JRAI and see what the abstracts do for each of them. I can't now remember how many words the word limit is, but usually all journals will have a word limit for the abstract. Definitely not 1 or 5. It'll be more sentences than that. But if you read past articles and the abstracts, you might get a sense of how they're framing their argument, their ethnographic insight, and so on. I'm conscious of time. I know people are wanted to ask. Yes, submissions from there's another question. Are submissions from independent scholars and interdisciplinary researchers welcome? Yes, everybody is welcome to submit. Again, it should speak to wide anthropological discussions. So, even if you're interdisciplinary scholar, you should keep that in mind. But we think of that in a broad sense as well. So I'm conscious of time. So I think we'll stop recording here.